The philosopher Schopenhauer, he said that as you get to a certain age in the unfolding of your life, what seemed like a story of chaos and confusion, when you look back at it, you see a sort of thread weaving through it. And I wanted to share with people that are perhaps going through moments of crisis and despair, or are finding themselves uncomfortable with their comfort and the, the mundanity of their life as they perceive it. A couple of stories about my life that may be helpful in the context of Schopenhauer's emerging threads that come with maturity and hindsight. One of the stories was I lived in Los Angeles on Main Street in Venice Beach, and I was practicing as a massage therapist, and I was studying the piano, and I had a teacher of the piano who was a lovely woman, and I met a musician. He had the #1 song in Germany at the time. His name was Sven Busch, and he had a Swedish name, but he was German, and he sang in English. And his song was called Faith, which is sort of synchronistic with the larger story here. And he met my music teacher and sort of fell instantly for her. And I had this feeling, it was a strange feeling that came in. And it was that I don't think she's the right woman for him. And I had a kind of devotion to him. I'm a straight man, and I just felt like he was going down the wrong direction. Far be it for me to make such an assessment. It really wasn't my place to do so. But it's just to tell you the story of how things work and how we can start to see in the chaos and the difficulty a deeper meaning unfolding. And he was moving to Paris, and he really liked my gift for words and lyrics, and he said, move to Paris, find a way to live there, and we'll work on songs together. I think we'd make a really good partnership. And for some reason, like, I don't smoke marijuana now. My father was an alcoholic, and I grew up in a family where unconsciously the way of handling stress was to take some substance to handle it. So that's what I was taught unconsciously, and I was very frightened because I saw his aggression and his Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde mind, and I just thought, oh God, I hope that isn't in me, because that's your male role model and right there in your face. And he has many attributes which are wonderful, of course, but that was the fear. And I remember at 16 I went to the island of Jersey to work on a bird reserve because I was very passionate about birds, and it was a volunteer position, and there was some, I was 16, but there were some guys in their early 20s, and it was all the rage. It was really cool for guys to smoke tobacco, hashish joints, and when you smoke a joint or something, there's a reason why they call it a high. And so that became a sort of lifestyle of mine for some time in my 20s, and then a little time in my late 30s, and then once more in my 40s for a couple of years. But I've quit now, and it was really a crutch. But that's the challenge when you grow up in an atmosphere where there's addiction. It just becomes the norm, and also was very much drawn to these spiritual concerns. And I'd met Tara Singh, my teacher that taught the Course in Miracles by then, and I never met such a profound being, and the thing was, there's no job in practicing the Course in Miracles. Well, people create businesses around it, become teachers and so forth, but it's not something that you can't go to a university and get a kind of a certificate in being a psychotherapist according to the Course in Miracles, although I think that would be very wise. But it's very challenging to enforce because its thought system comes from beyond the world to correct the illusions of how we see the world. and it's only sort of 50, 60 years old. But there's a lot of wisdom in the teachings of the Course in Miracles. So I was living in Los Angeles. My mentor was there. I was struggling to find a way to extend my immigration process, and I really wanted to be with him. And what happened was, I wanted to assimilate what he was pointing at, because I felt that he had something. And I would say that my greatest triumph in this life, although I feel like in a certain way in the worldly story I've been a great failure. Yes, I've had lots of different jobs. Yes, I've lived in 32 countries, traveled in more than 80, lived on 5 continents. On a certain level, my life is a success. But I don't yet have property. I don't have a wife and child that's worked. I don't have a kid of my own. I don't have much money in my bank account. None of this is said to engender pity, but it's to sort of paint the story of like the stereotypical like success in the world. I don't see myself as that person, but I would say my greatest success was that something resonated in me with truth, an inner truth. When I met Tara Singh, who was teaching the Course in Miracles, he was the first generation of teachers out there teaching the Course. And it was his presence, because in a way I would say that Kenneth Wapnick technically might be a better teacher of the Course in Miracles. He's a very respected teacher in the world of the Course mythology, and for good reason. But being close to Tara Singh was where my life was at. And you know, I had so many profound experiences, and it was such a, like, he was in a way the love of my life, not in the sexual sense, but it was like, in Indian philosophy they say that the teacher that opens your mind to the possibility of something beyond what you think the world is the greatest blessing you can come across. And so I smoked this joint, and I'm pretty good at massage therapy, and I sort of flirted a bit with this woman that was teaching me piano, and I said, would you like a massage? And it was a very sort of Machiavellian move, because my agenda, and I'm not lying about it, was, and I'm not typically that kind of person, but this is just a story, right? And you've got to see the story in terms of the larger unfolding rather than the act itself, right? So I gave her a massage, and it went a bit further. We were all hormones at that age, you know, she wasn't much different in age than me. And it really was a one-night stand kind of vibe. And then I went to Paris, and I thought I'd succeeded, right? In the sense that I was on my quest to write songs, and I'd shown my brother. I mean, there's no way you can listen to this and think this is intelligent, because I don't advocate that it is, but I'd shown my brother, in inverted commas, this songwriter, that, you know, this woman wasn't right for him. I just and I sort of it was, sorry to put it this way, but like damaged goods, right? Not to use that in a sort of chauvinistic way, but like, yeah, she's not right for you. I just had a fling with her, but I think you can see from, I mean, it was crazy thinking, right? It was crazy making, but it wasn't crazy making in the sense that I was delusional or trying to do something mean, although you could interpret it that way. But from what happened next was I went to Paris. A friend of mine had done a tantric seminar with a model, an American model who'd lived in Paris, and her husband, and in Los Angeles, and she said that she had this multimillionaire friend that could do with a hand selling his many cars. So he was an aristocrat. He had all these Mercedes, and this was around the time the Matrix movie came out. So I flew to Paris, and he put me up, and I worked for him in his apartment in Paris, and then also in Neuilly-sur-Seine, which is a very posh area of Paris, near where Lady Diana was killed, and where all the embassies are. Sort of very sort of, and the Arc de Triomphe, and it's like not too far from the Eiffel Tower. It's a very trendy upmarket area of Paris. And then he had a chateau at that time in Normandy, and we used to commute with the cars, and it was, but it was a very, it wasn't, I remember it was like this atmosphere of like privilege, but in lacking depth, and lots of insecurity often goes with privilege, and that was there. And I just got bored of it. There was no, like, as Carl Jung says, there was no font of life there. It was all about preservation and hoarding and judgment of people. And he was quite a wounded character, as we all are in different ways, until we start to take steps further down the path of healing. He was a homosexual, and he was very kind to me, but he was very conflicted. And I think that in a sense that was because of all the money that he'd been born into, and the traps that money can bring in the wrong hands. And so I had a friend, again from California, that introduced me to someone that was studying in Paris, and she told me about Shakespeare and Company. And so that was a bookshop, and I went there, and I got a place to live. And it was around that time that I went to see Sven, and he said, well, I'll see you in the next life, brother. And that was the end of it. He'd been really hurt by my actions. And you could look at that story and say, well, Nathan, you're an idiot. Of course that would happen. But I sort of, I can't say that I felt like a fool. I think to a certain degree I felt, oh God, what did I do? I remember telling Edouard, the French aristocrat, about the thing I'd done. He's like, well, that's the end of that. You will not see him again. I did see him again. I saw him, and he wouldn't pick up the phone, but I went to his apartment, and he happened to be walking by with a friend of his that I knew from California, also called Michael, another German guy. And they had connections in the sports journalist world. He was a friend of Steffi Graf. And he said, I'll see you. No, this is Nathan. No, this is inappropriate. I don't feel comfortable. And so I thought it was a great failure, and there was a sense of being a fool to a degree. But then on another level, there was a sense like something else is happening here. And I went into the bookshop, and right away, like, I met my first wife. I've been married twice so far. And she was from a family in Minnesota, and she was quite intellectual. I remember meeting her father, and he was not a fan of Joseph Campbell, although he was himself a professor of comparative mythology. And I remember reading his books on Beowulf, and I couldn't get past the first page. They were so dry and academically sterile and full of bibliographies, and it was like the heart was wrenched out of this beautiful subject. And I don't mean to put him down, but that was how I experienced his books, and they were so dry. And I when we got out of the plane in Chicago, later on, when we were going back to America, I said, well, what are your thoughts about Joseph Campbell? And Martha said, don't ask him that question. If you're going to ask him any question. I was like, okay, of course I asked him that question. And I told him, like, Martha said, don't ask that question. He said, maybe you should listen to Martha. But I think one of the challenges for academics with people like Carl Sagan and Joseph Campbell are these rare creatures that become popular, and they go beyond the sort of dry ivory tower of their discipline, and they speak to a wider audience. And I think a lot of academics are jealous of that kind of thing. And also, Martha's father, Bruce, was I think his mother was Jewish, or his his mother was Jewish, and he married a lady that wasn't Jewish, and so the Jewish line ended. But there's rumors that Joseph Campbell was an anti-Semite, which he wasn't, but people love to prey on popular minds that are, as Campbell was a wonderful character. I think he was one of the great Americans that have come out of that culture so far. And the fact that because America was in a way born from religious persecution, right? All the people that came from Western Europe and other places were running away from religious persecution. So you had this melting pot of people that were like, well, we like to look at things differently when it comes to religion. We're not so orthodox, or we're more orthodox, and they won't tolerate those two extremes. So we'll leave our country and go to America. And so you had this real melting pot of possibility. And since America has been alive as an entity, the United States of America, you've sort of gotten three religions coming forth. You've got Scientology, you've got Mormonism, and then the teachings of the Course in Miracles, which isn't a religion, thank God. So there has been sort of and there's obviously the language is different in America. It's British English and Australian English, but only small differences really. And I was really taken by Joseph Campbell at that time. And I was also taken by my teacher, Tara Singh. And you know, the Course in Miracles has been on the planet about 50 years. It kind of came into the world around the time I was born. And without a doubt, you know, it's the most, I mean, it's in a Christian language, but if you can, and hopefully you can see beyond that, because otherwise you're bound to these Christian myths. And that's not the purpose of the Course. The purpose of the Course is to liberate your mind, but it happens to be in a Christian language. But the value of the Course in Miracles is that I without doubt, it's the most advanced metaphysical teachings we have on the planet today, like greater than any of the other philosophical models in its depth, except perhaps the teachings of Ramana Maharshi. But even Ramana Maharshi doesn't have this sense of the teaching of what guilt is as a belief that we've destroyed our essence, which we haven't. And we're guilty for that, and we project out all our negative emotions onto the world and others to disguise that that's what's really going on, that we're guilty for something we think we've done, which isn't true. And so I went into this bookshop, and boom, you know, I was 24 or 25 at the time, I think 25, and then so I met Martha when I was about 25, 26, and she was 24, and she was very academic, and I had something in me that was intelligent, but could struggled with the fixity and the fear that goes with the fixity of the academic mind. And she was very much bound up in that conveyor belt system, not judging people. People can get perfectly good lives on that path, and it can mess them up. It's just a tool, academia, but it can blind you. And the beauty of the Course is that it came from Helen listening with her colleague with precision, and they came from the academic world, but they were writing something down which went far beyond the limits of that. And she knew it, and she didn't want her name associated with it, and she didn't want it published, really. I think she wanted to be out of the way before it came along, but when she was asked what was her greatest contribution in her life to mankind or to living, she said, oh, the Course in Miracles, without a doubt. And she would say, I don't believe it, but I know it's true. And that was reflective of her own split mind and her issues with the Course. And I suspect of all the people that have taught the Course, she was probably the most advanced teacher of them all, although she was never the public face of that. My teacher studied with her for a year, and I think other than Ken Wapnick, he was the only one to go through the Course in its entirety with her. And that's why I felt always very blessed to have met him. But I walked into the bookshop and I met Martha, and you know, we became a couple quite quickly, and I stayed at the bookshop, and George Whitman, who owned the bookshop, he's dead now. It's now run by his daughter in Paris, right in the opposite Notre Dame, in this really romantic, sort of like bohemian heartland of Western culture. You know, it's like Victor Hugo lived near there. James Joyce had his books published there. Ernest Hemingway would hang out there. You know, all these great writers and thinkers and dramatists. guy that wrote Waiting for Godot. I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but there was this sort of like wonderful literary culture, and these young people, dancers from Sweden, you know, writers from Italy and America and Britain, and they're just young people meeting on this quest to find meaning in literature and art. And it was like, and then like this beautiful backdrop of the Parisian culture, you know, and it's wonderful food and wine being relatively cheap and less taboo than in and less abused than like the Anglo-Saxon cultures. And so it was just it was like, I remember going to Paris from Los Angeles, and just like people dressed well, and they had a sort of like old world aloofness, and sort of they had this veneration for, you know, they have tu and vous, which is like the polite form, and then the informal form. And it was just like such a contrast to sort of the casual nature of the American culture, which has many great strengths, but it was nice to go back to this. And you know, Hemingway said, if you're, you know, as a young man, if you can spend a good deal of time, a year or so, in Paris. And I had that blessing, and I'm really grateful for it. I don't think I'd like to live there again, although, you know, that's all at the level of form. But when you're young, you know, in your 20s and 30s, the world is an oyster, and you want to lap it up. And that was my nature anyway. I was very much this seeker and this, you know, nomad, and this quester over the serendipities that lead to the deep synchronicities. And so this love affair takes place in this romantic place, and she's quite depressed because she's dropped out of college and paused it and doesn't quite know where to go, and is handling, you know, a lot of the things that come with the youthful experience, and trying to figure out her path. And then she falls in love with me, and I with her, and we go back to America. I persuade to take her to Los Angeles, which is a place she hated, because, you know, she likes San Francisco, she likes New York. These are much more, in a sense, cultured places, whereas, you know, Los Angeles is freeways and movies and not so many books and stuff. It's a different vibe entirely. There's a lot of vanity, but I like the climate in Los Angeles, and I'd had some close friends there, and I'd met Tara Singh there, and that was really the center of the world for me. And that was my greatest success in terms of the inner life, that I saw into something really valuable in what this man was saying. And it's taken me years to really extrapolate the pain mechanism inside my head that attaches to a status symbol or an identity or a vain story of association and insecurity. That is the ego, and to see that in the operation of myself and others, and to not judge it, and to drop it as a way of being. That's been a lifelong path. But if I hadn't met Tara Singh, you know, that door wouldn't have opened. But I was, you know, when the student is ready, the teacher appears, and I didn't know I was ready. I was just in the chaos of the world at that time, and for many years it was that way. And then I went to India to study yoga. And that was challenging because, you know, in Indian culture, only really Ramana Maharshi and Advaita Vedanta can be compared to the Course in Miracles, because it's a non-dualistic approach to transcending fear. And all the other ones sort of like, you can get lost. There's nothing wrong with yoga, but I don't think it's generally leads to as deeper results as studying the Course in Miracles or Ramana. You get sort of trapped in the body idol, the idol of the body. So it was funny, because what seemed like a great era was meeting this singer, moving the world I was embroiled in, from Los Angeles to Paris, and then doing something that came from like this, like anyone that hears that story and think, well, what an idiot, why would he do that? Why would he try and sleep with a woman he wasn't interested in, just to prove his loyalty to a close friend who was enamored of her? Of course that's not going to work, and it didn't. But there wasn't so much like it was coming from a place that went beyond logic in the in the bastardized toxic version of that word that we use today. It came from a place of logos, and I can see that now, because my calling wasn't to be a great success in the world, although my ego's calling wanted that. But my calling was to wake up. And the best person at that time in my life to support that process was a painful divorce that was around the corner from the marriage. And this relationship with Tara Singh. And then I went to India because I'd studied the Course for a while, and I thought, oh, the Course is just all words, you know. You have to do something. And then I had visions that guided me. Projection makes perception. And that was the underlying belief that maybe yoga was deeper. And then I went to India in my 30s, again based on inner visions, inner guidance. I went to India and I studied with Krishnamurti and Tara Singh's yoga teacher. And the moment I told him I was Tara Singh's student, he looked at me with such an intensity, because I knew when he said that Tara Singh, aside from Krishnamurti, was his most advanced student. I knew that. Like, there's lots of very advanced spiritual minds in this world, but Tara Singh was just so evolved. You know, babies would stop crying in his presence. He'd really gone a long way. And I think when you meet someone like that, right, because there's lots of gurus in the world, and there's lots of like Course in Miracles teachers, and they're all doing their best, and if you judge them, you judge yourself. But there is a certain discrimination that comes in when you meet a character like that, because you know, my God, I've gone to the Mariana Trench in the depths of the ocean with this character, and there's other people and they're very shallow. And that's been a problem for me, because to meet someone so young in my life like that, and then to meet all these other spiritual teachers and psychotherapists, it's like they're swimming in the shallows and you've been accustomed to the depths. And that's definitely been an impediment for me, because it's like, how do you sit with those depths and not judge the shallows, you know? And that's been a big path in my life, for sure. But yeah, so he looked at me, Desikachar looked at me, and you know, probably he was the greatest yoga therapist on the planet at the time. But he was always very aloof with me, because I knew that Krishnamurti had told him, don't become a guru. And in a way, he did become a guru. I could see it. There were things he did. It's very tempting when you have power in the world to get caught up in the cloak of the identity. And he definitely fell for that to an extent. And he had a son called Kaustubh, and Kaustubh is a famous yoga teacher, but he was kind of overweight and sort of arrogant, and he didn't seem to have the humility. He had a lot of great technical expertise in teaching yoga sutras and yoga asanas and pranayama and the 8 steps of yoga, because of the incredible family he grew up in. But you know, a blessing like that can be a curse, and it just made him into the spoiled kid who traveled all over the planet, and eventually, after many rumors about his misbehaviors, he was chased out of Austria for abusing 6 women, you know, and he was just a chauvinist. He wasn't a very nice person. And the problem was that people in the Krishnamacharya Yoga Mandiram, they supported that behavior to an extent, and then some of them started to talk up, because he was the boss's son, right? And Desikachar was really in a difficult place. And I have a friend who's a nurse, and she's dealt with a lot of people in old age homes and in, you know, the medical facilities associated with them. And she said that often people get dementia because there's something crisis that happens in their life, and they check out. They can't handle life anymore. It's too much. And Desikachar went in after the rumors about his son came out, he went in for an operation on his brain, and he came out with dementia, like it was like a surgical error. But I think that was just like the effect of a deeper cause, where he was like, I can't handle this, because in Indian culture, you know, there's so much respect for the elders, and this didn't reflect well on the father. And so he just checked out. It was, he'd done his job. But when I got there, he gave a lecture where I was present, and he said a story about a young man who had not had known his father, right? But he was very, very devoted to the truth. And in my case, I had a very difficult father. I've had a challenging relationship with my father because of his alcoholism and his, even when he quit drinking, he gets very angry and neurotic about things. And so that's been a challenge for me, because it's what they call, the sort of technical term is a dry drunk. And I love him very much, but I can't, I'm not very good around, and I think there's a sort of wisdom in that. Around aggression, the best thing to do is just to pull away. If you, if you engage with the aggressor, then of course, in the worldly state, that's, how do you handle a Putin or a Saddam Hussein or a George Bush, They are lost in their power trips and aggression takes over. But that's why, truth is never for the masses. Truth is for someone that's like, well, I'm going to look at the blocks to truth in myself, and that's a bloody hard tall order, right? And in recent years, I've got very interested in the work of Alan Savory. And, they're all about he's an ecologist in Africa, and they're all about looking at the wisdom of making the decision about how to manage the environment within the logos of the story. So you're making decisions in alignment with the greater good, not with the short-term stupidity and self-interest, but the self-interest with a capital S. But even those people, there's a lot of fear associated with them because it's my way or the highway, and they condemn the people that are wrong. And so anything that takes the mantle of a movement, even though there can be a lot of wisdom behind it, where the insecurity is not divorced from the wisdom, then you have movements, right? And truth is, you can have great teachers and great ecologists and great physicists that can fathom deeply into the nature of nature and the truth of that, which is a study of what the yogis call prakriti. And that's marvelous, but it won't liberate you from suffering. It will reduce suffering in your experience of the world if it's applied properly, whether to technology or management. But Purusha, this understanding of yourself as spirit and the thought system that goes with it, which informs Ramana's approach to looking at the mind, Ramana Maharshi, or the Course in Miracles approach to looking at the mind, which is through a Christian lens. They're saying the same thing, but with different linguistics. That started to grow in me as an interest as I saw how this man who allowed me into his circle to an extent, but then put walls up because I wasn't so materially successful, although I was the student of this great teacher, which he knew. But he put walls up because I wouldn't have been able to go into that environment and say, well, you're hypocrite, without saying you're hypocritical, right? And you're supporting the behavior of your son, and he's abusing his authority. So he protected his son. You can't judge him for that, and he kept me at a distance. And he told me about this young man from the myths who had, not had a father and gone to a teacher, and he said, well, you just work, you have a job, you can take care of my cows, and through the process of the pure heart that you've devoted yourself to truth with, you will come to learn my teachings. And so the cows would whisper in his ears, telepathically or however they did it, as the boys slept, because they loved the fondness that the cows were showered with by the young man. And over time, he imbibed the teachings of this great yoga teacher. In a similar way, my experience was there. But one of the things that the teacher, Desikachar, did for me at the very beginning was he came in a dream and he said, I want you to marry my daughter, Mekhala Desikachar. And he led me on. And I went to ask him once, I wrote him a letter, he always trying to avoid me. And I said, why would you come to me in a dream and say that? And he never clarified it, but he just strung me on. And I think that was the ruse that kept me in India, kept me out of a marriage and having children in my 30s, because I was so devoted to this sense that I was being divinely guided to carry on this lineage, which I thought was really special. And then I saw how at the end of 8 years, you know, he was sort of a broken man, very important and successful in the world, and had given a lot of people a lot of relief through the wisdom that he imparted. But the attachments to protecting his son when his son was needing scolding in a healthy way, and being limited from his exposure to the power, because in India, you know, the son and the father have a really powerful relationship, and it's about the lineage, and his pride blinded him. And I don't think he liked me at the end, because he knew that I could see his dark side. Not that I want to revel in that, but it factored into the course of my destiny too. So for a long time, I saw the limitations of power trips of gurus, and I still do. And I saw the limitations of the teachings of yoga, although I am grateful I studied the Yoga Sutras, but only for the context it brought me. And it brought me to a deeper understanding of the immense challenge that we all have to transcend the ego thought system, and the immense challenge that we have to look at the glut of painful feelings in our chest that come up now and again, and the depression and the sense of futility and nihilism, and the sense that things have no, we're born, we die, we go to old age, what is the purpose of life? It really was a cementing of the inner tenacity in me to find out all the different landscapes in myself of the blocks to truth, right? Whether it was the adulation of a teacher that was in principle very advanced, but in practice often betraying the ego's thought system. There before the grace of God go I. Or it was seeing myself doing the right thing, at least as far as I thought the rational mind with the music partner, only to discover that, you know, it was an error on a certain level, but a leapfrog forward to what I really wanted, which was to embrace the teachings of the Course in the company of a teacher that was very, 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 very far along on the path, much further than anyone I've met except one person since. Not to make all the other people comparatively less, but if you want to go very far, if you want to catch the big fish, you go far out into the ocean where the other ships aren't. And so that's why very deep teachers can be extremely challenging, because it's not what the world's about. It's not what superficial spirituality is about. It's not what the masses and the popular wisdom is about. It's about handling something in you that can't settle for second best, because it wants to go beyond suffering. And so I told these stories to sort of reflect how what can often seem like great failures in the world, like my falling out with the music partner, the musician from Germany, or the not getting the approval and appraisal that I wanted from Desikachar, were actually reflections of a deeper journey that saw through bullshit, right? My bullshit detector's pretty good. And that is often a great curse in this world, because people don't like being called out for their shit. Generally speaking, people have a very hard time with that, because the ego is so healthy and robust in it. How dare you question that there may be flaws in my thinking behind the prestige I associate with myself, right? Because we can get very threatened with that self-image, which is at the heart of Carl Rogers' focus and Krishnamurti's focus and the Course in Miracles focus. The self-concept is the biggest problem. The self-concept is a bit like the medieval king, right? And the only person in the court of the king that could laugh at the king was the jester, right? And if he didn't have that, there was no one to show up the mirror to his flaws, right? And so when you are put in the place where you have to play that character, the archetype of the jester, to yourself or others, you're in very dangerous territory, because, is this a game of who the fuck am I? like, like, we take very seriously who we think we are. And if people attack who we think we are at the level of image in our minds, we get very hurt. And the whole teaching of Krishnamurti is, I don't mind what happens, because he didn't associate with that identity that had fallen away in him. And that's what Carl Jung calls shadow work, where you see this robust animal that's angry and snarling and full of desires, and and in a way that character is very healthy. Like, your desires lead you down a path of fulfillment / unfulfillment to the realm of desirelessness, where the happiness of being shines forth and your enlightened nature is revealed. So if you're facing a period of life where nothing seems to make sense, or you think you've made a grave error, maybe you have, and maybe life is pointing you in the direction of something beyond the folly of the world that is supposedly cached as wisdom, when it isn't. It's actually fear and attachment to being someone of importance in the world. And I'm not saying you can't be a great singer and you can't be a great success in your life. By all means, give your heart to it completely. But in my own case, I gave my heart completely to the Course in Miracles. I made a prayer. I said, I want to master this. This is where the truth is for me. Not the book or the teachings or the words, but the message behind the invitation to live the truth of those teachings as an individual. And I don't think I've mastered that. But that still remains my own primary interest in life, because I've seen by the fruits of the evidence of the way my teacher was living, I've seen the fruits of his peace. Now, he was born into quite a wealthy family, so he didn't have a lot of the lack we associate with the mind that comes into like the third world with no money, or that is, like getting on in life and doesn't have much savings. These things are still problems that require the same tenacity of perception, that a miracle, faith in surrendering to the thought system that transcends the ego, that shift in perception, that holy instant will protect you from the identity with the victim mind and the victimizer mind. And that's the only way out of the labyrinth of time and space. There's no other way. Dying doesn't achieve it. The body is just a projection of the mind, and you get as many lessons as you can ticked off in this curriculum. And the lessons here are undoing, like at the spiritual level. They're not accumulation of knowledge. They're the undoing of fear. And then, you die and you take on a new body according to the Course and according to like Hinduism and Buddhism. And you move forward with that process of relinquishing fear. Whether you believe that or not, it's irrelevant to me, but that's something that I've embraced fully. Like, I know that there's only one moment in all of time and space, and it's now. And in it is all the opportunity we have to look again at the illusions that fear has brought us and drop them.